Create a matrix for positive perception to land. This is what I want to discuss today. What the hell do I mean by this? I noticed that when it comes to our self-esteem, a large amount of it comes to a chosen, whether conscious or unconscious, chosen perception on how we choose to view things in reality, how we choose to view what an experience means and what that experience means for our personal identity. What one thing could mean nothing to one person, whereas to another person it could mean as proof, as validation that they are not good enough. I want you to notice anytime you create stories in your mind that you're not good enough, that you're not worthy of love, that you're not, or that you should have done something better because you should have known better, right? I want you to notice this narrative that happens in your mind, and when it happens, it typically happens when we have some direct experience preceding it. Because all belief systems come from our mind projecting onto our direct experience. But we first have to have that direct experience to have something to project on. And what I've noticed is it can be very easy to go back to these patterns of finding ways that we are not good enough, finding ways that we can choose not to love ourselves, choose that we are not able to hit the mark, ways that we are not a good person. And when you make that pattern, that choice, whether it's a conscious or unconscious choice, to see yourself as in the negative light, you're going to build more and more of a case for that. And think of it this way. Each individual instance where you project onto reality, I am not good enough, that's like one node in your network. And so you have another time, another node, As more experiences happen and as more choices to perceive yourself as less than occurs, you end up creating a bunch of nodes in your little matrix of your mind. And these nodes start to interconnect and whatnot. And if you have very little times where you choose to see yourself as good enough, then you're not going to have very many nodes over here where you are good enough. So then what ends up happening is that you face head on a piece of direct experience, and then what happens is you have to have your mind project onto it to interpret that experience. And then you're at a crossroads between, do I interpret this in a way positive for my identity, or do I interpret this in a way negative for my identity? And if you have a whole Bible, you have a whole matrix of reasons as to why you should interpret this as a negative thing for your identity, contrasted against, a very small, you have a couple little nodes for why you should interpret this in a positive way, then the path of least resistance is always going to go with the easier one. The easier one being the one that's more known to you. For a lot of people, a lot of times, what is most known to us is patterns of negativity, patterns of seeing ourselves in a negative light. And this is because other people saw us in a negative light, because they chose to see us negatively. And then we take on that pattern for ourselves. And I want you to notice this is why it can be difficult to think positively. This is why it can be difficult to not hate yourself, or why it can be difficult to love yourself. Because you do not have many examples of instances of loving yourself, of being good enough. So then you have a whole textbook of ways to know that you're not good enough, but you have like a little pamphlet for ways that you are good enough. So then building self-esteem, the reason why it can take a long time and it seems like an uphill battle is because you are facing a textbook of constructs in the negative direction. And so with that in mind, we have to then take more intentional moments to create a textbook of constructs in the positive direction. And eventually, one day, that textbook will be so thick, so large in the positive direction that the path of least resistance goes into the positive direction, such that you default to seeing reality in a positive way, seeing yourself in a positive and loving way. But that takes time. But to understand how this is the way our mind works, it's through a matrix of constructs. Then we can begin to shift by choosing to create new nodes for the agenda we want. And this can happen in small ways. And eventually, over time, this will stack up more and more. And you can even revisit times where you interpreted things negatively and just ask yourself, okay, well, what's the positive interpretation of this? So you start mirroring. And what are some ways, now the question then can become, what are some concrete ways to really embody this? So next time something happens in reality, let's say an event, that can be interpreted as negative, ask yourself, well, what's the silver lining here? That's a very good question. Always ask, what's the silver lining? Eventually, you may get to the point where you realize it's all silver. When you look at someone, what are you thinking about them? What comes up? What are some positive ways, positive things about them that you can think about them, positive traits? When something does something to you that is not in your benefit, to put it lightly, what are ways that you can understand their perspective from a positive light? with a assumption that they had good intentions. When you don't measure up in some way, like you didn't make your bed, or you didn't wake up on time, or you missed your workout, what's a positive way you can choose to interpret that? What's a way you can choose to interpret that aligns with self-acceptance? So rather than to find ways to demonize yourself and to be hard on yourself, where can you accept yourself? And alongside that, where are places that you are winning, that you're not counting? A lot of times we have a lot of expectations for who we want to be, and we only notice when we're not measuring up. We tend to forget all the things that we are doing, and we forget to count our wins, and we forget to count all the ways that we are being positive, all the ways that we are hanging in there. So what I'll leave you with is a reminder to start noticing a lot more the ways you are positively taking care of yourself, the ways you are good enough, to notice that, to start to create a huge matrix of positive perception, such that eventually, when it comes to the decision of looking at something in a positive or negative light, it is truly an easy, conscious choice that you can make, rather than defaulting to seeing things in a negative way. It'll be a lot easier to make a choice in the positive direction once you've constructed a large matrix for yourself, a large case for yourself. And I want to remind you that this case building process is part of becoming who you came here to be. Because positive self-talk is everything. Self-talk can put you to the highest highs and the lowest lows. So being able to strategically construct that is extremely important. So with that, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.